Hey everybody, got another video here. Sticking on the theme, I don't know, I seem to have a lot of videos like this in my stream recently, which might be reflective of the fact that I've watched a few of them and so I've received some more. Or it might be reflective of the fact that there seems to be some kind of conferences going on at the moment. So anyway,
Good evening. They're called the WPATH Files. These are 170 pages of files, documents, conversations between doctors and therapists associated with the organization WPATH. And what they say is important because our medical associations and institutions here in the United States look to them for guidance. Take a look.
About kids is that we're often explaining these sorts of things to people who haven't even had biology in high school yet.
This video is from an internal panel discussion from WPATH, an interdisciplinary medical association devoted to transgender health and gender medicine.
okay, so apparently there's been some, well, it says leaked files. Looks like somebody's done some screen recordings. So this is what we've got. I haven't actually seen the files yet, so I've only seen these news reports, but I'm going to imagine that they've picked the most salacious points of these, the most compelling points, and put them to us.
To understand their significance in this space, the major American medical groups recognize WPATH's standards of care as the authoritative standards for the provision of transgender health care.
Some of the Dutch researchers gave some data about young adults who had transitioned and reproductive regret. And it's there. And I don't think any of that surprises us.
But the video, released in a report called the WPATH Files, shows doctors and therapists talking internally about cases and issues around medical transition for minors.
Okay, and so that gotcha video seemed to have been a guy saying that there can be some regret related to, I guess, loss of reproductive functioning, and how I'm guessing how that relates to harvesting materials beforehand. As I understand it, you can have your eggs frozen or your sperm frozen and then use that later. But I guess, actually, I have no idea whether they do hysterectomies on trans people who are trans men transitioning from female to male. I don't know about that kind of thing. But either which way, they should be able to have genetic children and potentially carry them themselves. In fact, that must be a thing, because you see trans guys in the newspaper, and they have there'll be pregnant trans guys occasionally in the nursepaper. So that must be possible. So, but naturally, I would imagine that there'll be some level of regret. Every surgery would have them. So there's a doctor who acknowledges that there'll be some level of regret. That didn't seem like a gotcha moment to me. I don't know about you guys. And who got cases 2 collective. Several trans men in their late 20s and early 30s have done a range of something and medical interventions. I'm guessing this isn't the strongest point, because if it were, then they would have mentioned it, and they certainly would have included it so that we could read it. They are now clear that in hindsight, so there's several, so we're talking about a handful, like, maybe 3 to 7, that are now out of well, it's an international group, so that would be out of, I don't know how many trans people to expect that there would be around the world. Hundreds of thousands, millions, I don't know. Certainly a lot more than you would expect for this to be a significant sample. Several trans men in their late 20s and 30s have done a range of. Okay, so I'm assuming that's the same thing. They are now clear that in hindsight, if they'd come out 10 years later, they may not have taken all medical transition steps. They did something, option of non-binary identity had been on the table. So it sounds like these were potentially non-binary, and the system that they were using was binary, and so the system didn't recognize non-binary, and so they would have preferred that option. Okay, so they would actually like to be non-binary.
It's pretty shocking. You don't need to be an expert in medical science to read these conversations.
I'm reading that as I'm not an expert in medical science.
And come away absolutely shocked at the things they're describing how they're sort of making it up as they go along.
Michael Schellenberger, a journalist who was...
I mean, I would imagine that most doctors, despite their training, will have to handle every situation differently because every situation is different, you know? And you can rely on your experience and your training, but not every single situation is exactly the same as the textbook procedure and the textbook things. I would imagine that particularly in cases of mental health that we have to treat everybody as an individual. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's a treatment principle.
Part of the team who released the Twitter files, along with...
Oh, great, the Twitter files. They were so successful. Is it what, Matt Taibbi? What an embarrassing fiasco that was. Right-wing hit job.
Report author Mia Hughes is releasing the WPATH files in their totality for all to see. The report argues WPATH is pushing, quote, pseudoscientific surgical and hormonal experiments on children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults, and calls on the government to initiate bipartisan national inquiry to investigate how activists with little respect for the Hippocratic Oath could have risen to such prominence as to set the standards of care for an entire field of medicine.
Well, I really hope they've got much better evidence than a doctor in the field acknowledging that that there is some level of regret. Oh, and half a paragraph that you can't read saying some non-binary people would have preferred the option to be non-binary had it been available to them.
In one internal conversation, you see a doctor responding to a nurse practitioner who is struggling with how to handle a patient with PTSD, major depressive disorder, observed dissociations, and schizoid typical traits who wishes to go on hormone therapy. The doctor writes, "I'm missing why you are perplexed. The mere presence of psychiatric illness should not block a person's ability to start hormones."
Okay, well, we don't know what that was in response to. I think the fact that it was taken out of context like this is probably telling, although I'll reserve judgment until I see it. Although I will say that just because somebody has mental health conditions, particularly conditions like this, that are depressive, I think probably you could expect somebody to be depressive if they're living as what they consider to be the wrong gender. I think if you were to look at some of the places in America where they say that you're not allowed to receive any transitional care unless you are free of other symptoms such as depression, that's really blocking any form of transition support to anybody, because I would imagine the majority of people who believe that they should be a different gender would experience some form of depression. The existence of other conditions, I mean, you don't know the extent to which they're there. So we really don't know anything about this case at all from what's being said here, other than the fact that there are some other mental health conditions there to some extent. I certainly don't feel like I've heard enough to go, this is shocking.
We're seeing discussions of giving a 10-year-old girl puberty blockers.
Okay, puberty blockers block puberty. So if the girl was going through puberty, would that not make sense? Plus, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what puberty blockers are for, right? So, I mean, so at whatever age the child goes through puberty, then puberty blockers are put in to delay the decision. And I don't even think if you're going through puberty at 10, that delaying that puberty would be particularly controversial in this case. I mean, I don't understand why that would be the case. Puberty blockers, as I understand it, were made initially to prevent was it called precocious puberty? Is it like an early puberty? I don't see anybody shouting about that. So, I mean, I don't understand why this is shocking.
Giving treatments to 13-year-old with developmental delays. There's a case of a person with schizophrenia who's also homeless. They're talking about performing genital surgeries on this person. Okay.
So if you have schizophrenia, which as I understand is an ongoing condition, not something that you generally lose completely, although I'm in no way trained as a medical practitioner. if you have this, then I would imagine it'll be something that you're going on with for your life. Okay, right. So let's imagine that you sometimes hear somebody talking to you who's not there, and that you're homeless. There's obviously a massive overlap between LGBT people and being homeless. There's also a massive overlap between mental health and being homeless. Okay, so they're a homeless person. I don't know why that actually factors into this decision at all. Do we refuse to provide healthcare to homeless people? I mean, if I'd said, oh, you need your leg amputated, but you are homeless, so probably best not to do that. But why would I do that? I don't understand why it's relevant. The reason being, if you look at other discussions around this case that are taking place online, they feel that homeless people shouldn't be allowed to undergo surgical interventions because of the recovery period. So I guess that, we just never do surgeries on homeless people. Or should the fact that they have a level of schizophrenia, should that automatically prohibit them from receiving other medical health interventions? This is just astounding that they feel like this is some kind of gotcha.
While these exchanges among gender care professionals point to some of the many challenges in the rapidly evolving field, Schellenberger believes they point to a bigger problem.
I think at the heart of it is the proof that the files offer that the patients and the parents are not giving their informed consent.
Are they not? Have you shown me any evidence of that so far? So far, you've shown me a video of a doctor acknowledging a form of surgical regret. I would assume that he talked about the resolutions for that, but obviously the video wouldn't show us that. So we've got a video of a doctor acknowledging that there are some regrets, like there are in every surgery. So, and then we've got a couple of cases where there are existing mental health conditions to consider as well, that, so far as I can see, shouldn't preclude any form of treatment of this condition. And somebody who's going through puberty, having puberty blockers, it's astounding.
We're doing informed consent. I know that that's still a big lacuna of that we do it. We try to talk about it, but most of the kids are nowhere in any kind of a brain space to really, really, really talk about it in a serious way. That's always bothered me.
Mia Hughes is the author of the report. She takes issue with the way this endocrinologist describes fertility preservation.
Okay, so all of the issues that they're talking about, certainly the issues of informed consent, seem to come down to something called Gillick competence. And Gillick competence is the test that we use to determine whether somebody is able to make their own medical decisions. And we use it for children going onto the pill. So if you're, for example, 16 years old, still a minor, still considered a child, but potentially sexually active, these are decisions that the children are able to make themselves without necessarily a parental intervention. Although there's examples of Gillick competence being applied in obviously people under the age of 16. So Gillick competence is a term used in medical law to decide whether a person under 16 years of age, so I was using the word child, I probably should have been using the word minor, whether they're able to consent to their own medical treatment. Although, as I understand it, does apply to others who might not be, so who might be questioned for other reasons. But it's a test to see whether somebody is able to make their own decisions and so this has always been, not always, this has long been the case. And there are criteria, and I would imagine that in all of these cases that it becomes a matter of, I wouldn't imagine there's sort of like a sudden point where suddenly somebody becomes aware of everything that they need to know in order to be able to make these decisions. It's kind of a sliding scale, and I would imagine that there's plenty of different issues to pick out, particularly in complex cases where we have instances of particularly mental health complications. I don't think anybody's suggesting that it's an easy thing to tease apart some of the more complex cases in terms of Gillick competence. But I think it's important to consider the wants and needs of somebody who is able to express them. We do it in every other case. If you want to diagnose other conditions, you'll be listening to and attempting to understand the view and perspective and evidence provided by a person under the age of 16. If you are diagnosing, for example, schizophrenia, you're doing that on the basis of evidence of a child. And if you're asking them whether they want their tonsils out or whether they want, whether they have to have some other form of surgical intervention that might be necessary. Let's say I mentioned precocious puberty earlier on. The treatments for these things, I would imagine, would involve the views and perspectives of the child. That's not abnormal. Even in cases where to tease out the perspective of the child and to consider how much weight to give the perspective of the child, that might be complicated in some cases. I don't understand why that's a gotcha.
For young girls.
We've got a pediatric endocrinologist who very clearly knows that these young people, these adolescents, cannot understand lifelong sterility.
I wouldn't say that's the case, particularly if the evidence is the video that you were referring to earlier on. They don't clearly know that they're incapable. They may have said that they don't understand it.
He says, when he's talking about fertility preservation with a 13-year-old, it's like talking to a blank wall.
It's always a good theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall. And the same would happen for a cisgender kid, right? They'd be like, ew, kids, babies, gross.
He says,
Yeah, so he's there saying that they hadn't thought about it at all and that it's not usually a subject that they would engage with. Kids, gross. Doesn't mean that he then is unable to and doesn't then talk them through it and doesn't talk them through it in combination with their parents.
They'll say, ooh, baby's gross, which is, of course, a perfectly natural teenage reaction. I was once a 13-year-old girl. That would have been my reaction. I'm now in my 40s. I have 3 children, and they are my entire life because I was allowed to grow and mature and change.
I see how she's comparing her experience as a non-trans person to the experience of a trans person.
And then this doctor also sees that there's regret because he sees the adolescents.
Okay, so all I've seen so far is a doctor acknowledge that their children start off not having thought about these things and generally not naturally engaging with them. They didn't say that they don't talk to them or their parents, and then they've acknowledged that there's some form of regret for them to deal with as well. Nothing for that, I think, should be shocking in any way.
When they come back in their 20s and they've met someone and they want to settle down, and he says to them,
I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm always like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, right? Yeah, they're like, no, I just found this, wonderful partner and now we're kids and da-da-da. So I think,
Is that not the point where they would unfreeze their eggs or their sperm or whatever and then go from there?
It doesn't surprise me.
I think that this is a medical scandal.
Dr. Julia Mason is a pediatrician in Oregon and has been sounding the alarm on medical transition for minors for years.
The pediatricians involved.
Okay, Dr. Julia Mason. Well, I mean, she's a member of the AAP. What is the AAP? Let's have a quick look. Member of the AAP. Let's look it up. AAP is the American Association of Pediatrics or Pediatricians. Pediatrics. Here we go. Here's the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it's through these that she is gaining her credentials. She is using those credentials on screen here, member of the AAP, to help give her credence. Let's see what the AAP thinks about gender affirming care. This is a large organization, as I understand it, the largest pediatric organization in the world. Oh, look, it looks like just in August they've reaffirmed their gender affirming care policy. Okay, let's have a look. Here's their policy. AAP policy statement urges support and care of transgender. No, that's not available anymore. Where is it? Ensuring comprehensive care and support for them. Seem to. US pediatric leaders back gender affirming care approach. The American Academy of Pediatrics reaffirmed its policy supporting the gender affirming model of care. And this is all recent stuff as well, you know. It's from August 2023. They said that they would commission a systematic review of the evidence and develop an expanded set of guidance based on this. They're refining and expanding their gender-affirming model approach. And they're not just doing this because WPATH say, they are doing themselves a systematic review of the evidence. And all of these bodies, the many large bodies that support this approach, they don't just listen to WPATH, they conduct their own research. You know, the idea that we should listen to this person because they're a pediatrician and a member of the AAP, when there are thousands more members of the AAP, thousands more pediatricians who say that Dr. Julia Mason is wrong, then I don't know why we would be listening to her.
Have somehow forgotten everything they were taught about childhood development.
Yeah, so they've all somehow forgotten, they're all wrong, and she is right. And the evidence for this is this flimsy clip of a video that says nothing, and a couple of example cases with no real detail and no real... Yeah, I mean, I've yet to look at the documents myself, but considering that these are supposed to be the most salacious parts of it, the most compelling parts, I'm not impressed.